Hello, everyone. Welcome to Journey, Care, and Legacy, and for watching. My name is Sonora Darrido, your host and the founder of Journey, Care, and Legacy. Today, we have a special guest with us. His name is Mr. Stephen Ambrosich from Modesto, California. And Mr. Ambrosich has worked with acute and subacute care patients, acute and subacute care patients. And I must add this special gift he has, and I hope that he doesn't mind that I'm sharing this. But he's also he has a wonderful gift of putting together astrological considerations to life events. And I am a testimony of his accurate work and intuition. I want to welcome you, Mr. Ambrosich.
Well, thank you. Well, thank you, Sonora. Are you hearing me well?
Yes.
Okay. Well, yes, and I'd like to thank you for the opportunity, the invitation to share some thoughts in relation to the Journey Care Legacy and the hospice interaction. Yes, I am a nurse. I've worked in the business for a little over 20 years in the acute, subacute, and long-term care setting. So I have worked intimately with the aging population and those in the process of death and the process of dying themselves. And as Sonora had asked me to share some thoughts concerning grief, and the conversation was a bit perplexing because I had thought, I says, well, actually, I've never really experienced what I would consider the use of the word grief. Yes, both my parents have died. My mother died about 6 years ago. My father died about 10 years ago. Sudden cardiac pulmonary events, so there weren't a lot of lingering complications or any kind of prolonged painful sufferings for either one of them. But because I have been involved in the business of caring for other people at the end of their lives, it was very comforting in one particular regard to care for my own parents and my family in the event of the death. When life ends, certainly there's things, oh, I would like to have said, this would have been better if I had or had not. And those things I've considered as, well, those were disappointments, those were missed opportunities. And at the time of my father's internment at a Veterans National Cemetery, I was trying to perplex. It's like, well, what really was it that was on my mind that I'd say? Well, one of the regrets was, I said, well, I would have liked to have said, thank you for allowing me to read what I wanted to read as a teenager, and that you never interfered with my reading. It's just something simple. But in most people's lives, and when someone dies and feel a sense of loss, that person is gone, and oh, I wish I could go back, things I could have said, things I could have not said, things I could have added. But for myself, reflecting on the course of life, I was impressed that these were kind of like disappointments or like disappointments or like missed appointments, that these were events that just didn't get to happen, and I would have an opportunity to learn from them in upcoming events in the later parts within my life. So I could say in one particular regard that I could say, well, I've experienced grief in certain regards, but then again, I'm not a political refugee nor an economic refugee, but there have been events in my life, as in everyone's life, where things haven't gone as planned. And this just reminds me and us that we don't really control our lives, and it's not that lives control us, but events can come so rapidly and so unexpectedly that, how does an individual prepare for it? And it's not preparing for the event, but it's an opportunity within one's mind and mentation of how one adapts to the changes. And in this particular regard, I look at the chronology of death. I'm going to be 65 real closely here.
Yes,
And
actually, tomorrow, I think.
yes, that's right. As a matter of fact, the day comes up. And one of the things that strikes me as far as the interesting thing about chronology of death and dying is the significance of the North American indigenous totem pole. Is that as one person dies, another person moves closer to the top. And this can be considered as an anticipatory grief as, oh my gosh, my time is coming soon. How do I prepare myself? Well, this gets back.
So my question. So in other words, every day we're dying. Is that
Correct? And this is the idea of like, again, the suddenness of death, whether it be a stroke or it be a heart attack, whether it be a random bullet that comes through the wall of the house. Who really knows on how those things come? It's like when there's a person measure, would I like to know when I'm going to die and prepare myself, or not know when I'm going to die and just have events come? Right. And this is again what Sonora had mentioned, is why I do like to include astrology in the consideration of life events. Because one thing I've noticed in any cemetery I've gone to is one thing that's written on the gravestone of any one person is the date of their birth and the date of their death.
Yes.
And everything else is just in between story. So what I like to provide for people is an opportunity to share the events in a way that allows a person to develop a sense of archetypal meaning, a deeper level of life meaning. Mm-hmm. Because on whatever was happening in the person who's died, yes, that was a very important day in their life, but it was also an important day in that other individual's life, because these were considerations that also would apply to their own natal event. And my feeling, my experience is that in the resolution of grief, it's kind of significant for an individual to have thoughtful reflections upon the symbology of a larger cosmically aligned life pattern. Because where does a person go once a person dies? Who knows? That's all very speculative. But the idea that we can focus our thoughts upon those areas gives us a sense of serenity in the moment that we consider our own mortality.
So if I may ask, and correct me if I'm wrong, please. So according to what you said, basically you're saying that we should take grief and look at it in a positive manner, because it's really an addition to the continuation of one's life who remains alive, you know, the loved ones who are left behind, and the person who has gotten off the plane, and that person is no longer playing the role that they were playing when they were in our lives.
Yes, I would certainly agree with that very much. One of the things that is important for me that I like to remind myself of is the anthropology of being human, that we are all social animals. And when an individual close to us is removed from our sense of being, that is a part of ourself that is also diminished and is no longer there. And one of the things that I have noticed, again, in working in the business with aging and geriatrics, is that it's difficult for people to make friends like they did when they were 8, 9, 10, 11 years old. And the aloneness can become a sense of loneliness. It's like, oh my gosh, I'm the last person of all my peers. And now I would have liked to have died sooner so I wouldn't have to be so alone now. Mm-hmm. Getting back to the point that the grief allows an individual to have a contemplative reflection on the meaning that they have created within their life. And this is a spiritual gift that humans have. Certainly animals of other social groups, whether it's elephants or chimpanzees or gorilla troops or even packs of wolves, they have their own mourning ceremonies for when a member dies for whatever reason. But what we don't really know is their sense of self-reflectiveness within that particular time of the passing. And what we as humans have, we have the sense of memory. That's why funerals and cemeteries have memorial stones. So memory becomes a continuation that transcends time. And this then becomes a spiritual opportunity that all people have. And the exercise then is preparing oneself to work with a spiritual opportunity in a way that becomes very functional rather than being debilitative, rather than being the lightness of the angelic wings lifting to an individual to an etheric perspective, rather than feeling chained to the planet, doomed and tied within with a sense of suffering that becomes
magnified.
Magnified and cyclically repetitive, meaning that there is no exit from that sense of existential anguish. Now, I know this conversation ends up just being more conversational, and there really isn't a lot of the personal sharing. But again, this goes back to the point that for myself, I really haven't experienced that capital G association with grief, which so many other people have. I feel, though, that I have an opportunity to be supportive of other people because I'm able to feel a sense of an emotional neutrality.
Yes, absolutely.
Not to diminish what another person has experienced, but the idea of the presence of being with someone, either directly or indirectly, and in that particular sense has a kind of a calming modality, much in the same way as a person would go to a hair salon or a barber shop. You sit in the chair and you allow the other individual to kind of soothe and interact in a way that allows the person to feel a sense of oneness. And in that particular moment, a lot of times a person can say, well, grief never really goes away. True. But a lot of times people, what mistakenly happens is that they feel that if I let go of my grief, that means I let go of my love of that person. And the idea that happens so readily with a lot of emotions is that grief and love are equated, and say, oh my gosh, I can never let go of my grief, because if I do, that means that I've abandoned the love for that person. You're saying, well, no, that's not the case at all. The grief ends up being a reminder of the love, but the smile of daily living is what carries the memory of that person into the continuation of the future. And then that becomes a redeeming moment, and then the individual can smile quietly and say, yes, I am glad that I'm alive to share that memory.
I think you make a really good point there, Stephen, because I think that, yes, there are moments of guilt where we don't want to let go of our grief because we feel like we're forgetting, or like you said, or we've stopped thinking of that person, and then that feeling of grief can take over someone by letting go and just letting be. So I've experienced that myself when I lost my mother and my grandfather last year and her dog within less than 4-month period, where it took me a very long time to realize that, I had to take these pictures down from the walls because I don't need to constantly be looking at them right now. And maybe, and very likely, they will go back up, but when I'm more prepared, mentally, psychologically, physically, spiritually, to accept the reality that they are no longer here with me. But I think personally, I think you're really accurate about what you're saying, and it is a process of letting go and not feeling guilty because you are living on their legacy, and yeah.
And that's kind of the oddness about the language, because the idea of letting go suggests to a person that yes, it's something that I've dropped the keys down the sewer grate, and I just can't get them back. But what I like to remind myself of, and I do share this with people on a frequent and infrequent basis, is that yes, people die, yes, relationships die, but love doesn't die.
Absolutely.
And in that particular regard, it's not about the letting go, but it's kind of just reshifting again, as you used as the analogy and the literalness of it, of reframing the pictures on the wall. That these pictures are going to be taken down, but they're going to be placed somewhere else, and they will no longer be in a sense of prominence, but the the love associated with the picture and the memory is still going to be there within me. And even though I won't be able to maybe share that with too many people because they might not have known that person at all, but to be able to carry that sense of memory is part of the continuation of the love. And in that particular regard, then there is no loss. There is no loss, because the love ends up being the genuineness of its own sustaining reinforcement and the continuation of living life as a survivor.
Yes, that's true. Love is very strong, I believe. Stronger than electricity, as some of our greatest teachers, spiritual teachers, have said. I do believe it can move mountains, and I believe in the power of love. And yes, the love continues, and yes, it is a shift. Absolutely, I agree. Yeah.
Now, there's a thought that comes to me that I would like to share, Sonora, with you and your other listeners, as far as, again, my experience of working in the business. One of the things that I've noticed is very difficult for families is the sibling relationships. Sibling relationships, when a parent or grandparent dies, puts a tremendous amount of stress on the dynamics of the relationships, because an individual is having enough problem with dealing with resolving these issues, but then they have their own siblings dealing with the problem as well, adding aggravation. And what I noticed in the workday world is the adult children, they can be gray haired, they can have a cane, and they can have their glasses, and some of them can even be in wheelchairs. But when their mother or grandmother dies, all of a sudden they become 9 and 10-year-old children.
Yes, absolutely. Because I think that I was discussing this on another.
Oh, good.
Yeah, somebody had mentioned something, and I just wanted to share this. I don't quite remember if I shared this with that individual or not when we were recording the other day. And when my mother passed away or died, one day I was sitting on my couch and I looked at my belly button. And this is the simplest thought, okay? It's
a simple thought, yes.
Very simple thought that it just never crossed my mind the way it did after having lost her. I just looked at my belly button and I thought to myself, this is a part of my mom's body that's still on me. Like, it's such a simple thought, but it was like this moment for me where I was like I just broke through some kind of discovery or something, as simple as it is, you know? And believe it or not, that was all part of the journey. And now my belly button is very special to me. And before, quite frankly, I didn't really care for it much. But now I look at it and I'm like, Mom, good. I love you. You're here.
That's very good.
Know? And so I think you touched on a very important point about how the adult children become like 9-year-olds. I mean, even though they might be, gracefully aging or mature and stuff.
Yes.
Because that bond between the mother and the child, it's something very deep rooted, I believe. And I believe the real cord gets cut when and if a death occurs, whether the mother loses a child or vice versa.
Yes.
Well, Stephen, I want to thank you so much for joining us, and I think we have a lot to learn from you. You have a lot to offer, and I really appreciate your time, and I hope that we will see each other again, and you can contribute to our learning and growing and helping each other support one another through rough times of loss and bereavement, and through the hospice and end-of-life care group that we have, and our members, our viewers, and the mission that we as an organization, as a nonprofit organization, carry to raise awareness about death and dying and have more people speak about how they feel, and also prepare for their end-of-life care. I want to thank you again, Stephen, for joining us.
And thank you for the opportunity of sharing some thoughts that will, as you say, be with others.
It's always a pleasure.
All right.
You
Bye
take
then.
care. Goodbye.